technical problems we have, which persist. We weren't able to title this. So I'm very sorry about that. We will continue to work, but we didn't want to keep you hanging. Maybe you weren't. You've all got lives. You've gone on to other things. We're going to read the opening today of I Love Graham Greene. We have all of his books here. My favorite Graham Greene. It would be between this and Our Man in Havana, The Human Factor. Very much of the 1970s. I'm going to read the beginning, and I'm going to ask you in your mind as you hear this if you can figure out where this is going. Because among Caroline's many great talents is we can be watching a movie, we can be watching an episode of Law and Order, and inside of 30 seconds, she's going, "That's the one who did it. I can tell." And she's pointing to the guy who's selling ice cream in the corner. And then in the 58th minute of Law and Order, you find out, hey, what about that guy who was selling ice cream? I mean, it's amazing. So let me read the open of this.
And if you haven't read this book, run out and get it.
Yes. So remember, a spy story, including one of my favorite streets mentioned in here, darling. Castle, ever since he had joined the firm as a young recruit more than 30 years ago, had taken his lunch in a public house behind St. James Street, not far from the office. If he had been asked why he lunched there, he would have referred to the excellent quality of the sausages. He might have preferred a different bidder from Watney's, but the quality of the sausages outweighed that. He was always prepared to account for his actions, even the most innocent. And he was always strictly on time. So by the stroke of one, he was ready to leave. Arthur Davis, his assistant, with whom he shared a room, departed for lunch punctually at 12 and returned, but often only in theory 1 hour later. It was understood that in case of an urgent telegram, Davis or himself must always be there to receive the decoding, but they both knew well that in the particular subdivision of their department, almost nothing really was ever urgent. The differences in time between England and the various parts of Eastern and Southern Africa, which the two of them were concerned, was usually large enough, even when in the case of Johannesburg, it was little more than an hour, for no one outside the department to worry about the delay in the delivery of a message. The fate of the world, Davis used to declare, wouldn't be decided on their continent. However many embassies China or Russia might open from Addis Ababa to Conakry, or however many Cubans landed. Castle wrote a memorandum for Davis. If Zaire replies to number 172, send copies to Treasury and the FO. I imagine that's the Foreign Office. He looked at his watch.
It could be something else. Just kidding.
Oh, yeah, all right. Davis was 10 minutes late. Castle began to pack his briefcase. He put a note of what he had to buy for his wife at the cheese shop in Jermyn Street. Is that one of my favorite streets?
Yes, and I don't need to tell you how to pronounce it. I love it.
Yes. Jermyn Street in London, famed for its menswear, and of a present for his son, to whom he'd been disagreeable that morning, 2 packets of Maltesers, and a book, Clarissa Howe, in which he had never read further than chapter LXXIX. Roman numerals, of course, 450, 60, 80, of the first volume. Directly he heard a lift door close and Davis's step into the passage. He left his room. His lunchtime with the sausages had been cut 11 minutes. Unlike Davis, he punctually returned. It was one of the virtues of age. Arthur Davis in the state office was conspicuous by his eccentricities. He could be seen now approaching from the other end of the long corridor, dressed as if he'd just come from a rather horsey country weekend. See why I like him? Or the public enclosures of a racecourse. Tweed sports jacket of a greenish overall color, and he displayed a scarlet spotted handkerchief in the breast pocket. He might have been attached in some way to a tote. But he was like an actor who'd been miscast. When he tried to live up to the costume, he usually fumbled the part. If he looked in London as though he'd arrived from the country, in the country when he visited Castle, he was unmistakably a tourist from the city. Sharp on time as usual, Davis said with his habitual guilty grin. Well, my watch is always a little fast, Castle said, apologizing for the criticism that had not been expressed. An anxiety complex, I suppose. Smuggling out top secrets as well, Davis asked, making a playful pretense of seizing Castle's briefcase. His breath had a sweet smell. He was addicted to port. Oh, I've left all those behind for you to sell. You'll get a better price from your shady contacts. Kind of you, I'm sure. And then you're a bachelor. You need more money than a married man. I have the cost of living. Ah, but those awful leftovers, Davis said. The joint remade into shepherd's pie, the dubious meatball. Is it worth it? A married man can't even afford a good port. He went to the room they shared and rang for Cynthia. Let's just say he has a crush on Cynthia. You want to come in a bit nearer, Davis had advised Castle, in the overcrowded sitting room where magazines of different tastes, The New Statesman, Penthouse, and Nature littered the sofa, where the used glasses from someone else's party had been pushed into corners. You know very well what they pay us, Castle said, and I'm married. A grave judgment of error. Not for me, Castle said. I love my wife. And of course, there's little bastard, Davis went on. I couldn't afford children in port as well. I happen to like the little bastard, too. Castle was at the point of descending the 4 steps into Piccadilly when the porter said to him, Brigadier Tomlinson wants to see you, sir. Brigadier Tomlinson, yes, room A3. Castle had only met Brigadier Tomlinson once many years before, more years than he cared to count, on the day he was appointed, the day he put his name to the Official Secrets Act. All he could remember of him was a small black mustache hovering like an unidentified flying object over a field of blotting paper, which was entirely white and blank, perhaps for security reasons. The stain of his signature after he signed the act became the only flaw on its surface, and the leaf was almost certainly turned up and sent to the incinerator. The Dreyfus case had exposed the perils of a wastepaper basket nearly a century ago. Down the corridor to the left, the porter reminded him. Come in, Castle, Brigadier Tomlinson called. His mustache was now as white.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm not sure that's what the Dreyfus affair exposed.
That is an insular view of it, isn't it? Come to think of it, yeah.
Sorry.
Anti-Semitism, do you think? Yeah.
There's a new book about that, isn't there?
I believe. If you listen this weekend, maybe you'll find out. Yeah. A fair point, darling. In the narrow confines of his office. So come in, Castle, said Brigadier Tomlinson. His mustache was now as white as the blotting paper. With the years, he'd grown a small pot belly under a double-breasted waistcoat. Only his dubious rank remained constant. Nobody knew in what regiment he belonged, if such a regiment existed, for all the military and the titles in the building were a little suspicious. He said, I don't think you know Colonel Daintree. No, I don't think. How do you do? Daintree, in spite of his neat dark suit and hatchet face, gave a more genuine out-of-doors appearance than Davis did. If Davis at his first appearance looked as though he would be at home in a bookmaker's compound, Daintree was unmistakably at home in the expensive enclosures of a grouse manor. Castle enjoyed making lightning sketches of his colleagues. There were times when he even put them on paper. I did know a cousin of yours at Corpus, Daintree said. He spoke agreeably, but he looked a little impatient. He probably had to catch a train at King's Cross. Colonel Daintree, Brigadier Tomlinson explained, is our new broom. Castle noticed the way Daintree winced at the description. He's taken over security from Meredith. I suppose you mean my cousin Roger, Castle said to Daintree. I haven't seen him for years. He got a first in Greats. I believe he's in the Treasury now. Yes, I've been describing the setup here to Colonel Daintree, Brigadier Tomlinson prattled on. Well, I took law myself, a poor second, Daintree said. You read history, I think. Yes, a very poor third. And the House? Yes. I've explained to Colonel Daintree, Tomlinson said, that only you and Davis deal with top secret cables as far as Section 6A is concerned. You can't, if you can call anything in our top secret in our section. Of course, Watson sees them too. Davis, he's a Reading University man, isn't he? Daintree added, with what might have been a slight touch of disdain. Ah, I see you've been doing your homework. As a matter of fact, I've been having a talk with Davis myself. So that's why he was 10 minutes long over his lunch. Daintree's smile resembled the painful reopening of a wound. He had very red lips. They parted at the corners with difficulty. I talked to Davis about you, so now I'm talking to you about Davis. An open check. You must forgive the new broom. I have to learn the ropes, he added, getting confused about the metaphors. One has to keep the drill, in spite of the confidence we have in both of you, of course. By the way, did he warn you? No. But why believe me? We may be in collusion. The wound opened again a very little way and closed off tight. I gather that politically he's a bit on the left. Is that so? Well, he's a member of the Labor Party. I expect he told you that himself. Yes, nothing wrong with that, of course. And you? Castle says, I have no politics. I expect Davis told you that too. But you sometimes vote, I suppose. I don't think I've voted since the war. The issues nowadays so often seem, well, a bit parish pump. An interesting point of view, Daintree said with disapproval. Castle could see that telling the truth this time had been an air of judgment. Except on really important occasions, he always preferred the truth. The truth can be double-checked. Daintree looked at his watch. I shan't keep you long. I have a train to catch at King's Cross. A shooting weekend? How did you know? Intuition, Castle said, and again regretted his reply. It was always safer to be inconspicuous. There were times, which grew more frequent every year, when he daydreamed of complete conformity. I suppose you noticed my gun case by the door. Yes, Castle said, who hadn't seen it until then. That was the clue. He was glad to see that Daintree looked suddenly reassured. Daintree explained, there's nothing personal in all this. You know, purely a routine check. There's so many rules that sometimes some of them get neglected. It's human nature. The regulation, for example, of not taking work out of the office. He looked significantly at Castle's briefcase. An officer and a gentleman would open it at once for inspection. But Castle was not an officer, nor had he ever classified himself as a gentleman. He wanted to see how far below the table the new broom was able to sweep. He said, I'm not going home. I'm only going out to lunch. You don't mind? Daintree held out his hand. I asked the same of Davis. Davis wasn't carrying a briefcase, Castle said, at least when I saw him. Ooh. Daintree flushed at his mistake. He would have felt a similar shame Castle felt if he'd been shot a beater. Oh, it must have been after the other chap. I've forgotten his name. Watson, the brigadier suggested. Yes, Watson. So you've been checking our chief. All part of the drill, Daintree said. Castle opened his briefcase. He took out a copy of the Berkhamsted Gazette. What's this? My local paper. I was going to read it over lunch. Oh, yes, of course, I'd forgotten. You live a long way out. Don't you find it inconvenient? Well, less than an hour by train. I need a house and garden. I have a child, you see, and a dog. Can't keep either of them in a flat, not with comfort. I notice you're reading Clarissa Harlowe. Do you like it? Yes, so far, but there are 4 more volumes. What's this? A list of things to remember. My shopping list, Castle explained. He'd written under the printed address of his house, 129 Kings Road, 2 Maltesers, half-pound Earl Grey, cheese, Wensleydale or double Gloucester, Yardley pre-shave lotion. What on earth are Maltesers? Sort of chocolate. You should try them. They're delicious. In my opinion, better than Kit Kats.
No.
Daintree said, do you think they would do for my hostess? I'd like to bring her something a little out of the ordinary. He looked at his watch. Perhaps I could send the porter. There's just time. Where do you buy them? They didn't get them at an ABC in the Strand. Aerated bread? What on earth? Oh, well, there isn't time to do that. Are you sure these teasers would do? Of course, tastes differ. Fortnum's is only a step away. Well, you can't get them there. They're very inexpensive. I don't want to see him. Well, you can go for quantity. Tell him to get 3 pounds of them. 3 pounds of Maltesers. Can you imagine?
No.
What's the name again? Perhaps you could tell the quarter. Is my check over? Am I clear? Oh, yes. Purely formal, Castle. Good shooting. Well, thanks a lot. Castle gave the porter a message. 3 pounds, did he say? Yes. 3 pounds of Maltesers. Yes. The porter summoned the assistant porter who was reading a girly magazine. He said, 3 pounds of Maltesers for Colonel Daintree. That should be 120 packets or thereabouts, the man said after a little calculation. No, said Castle, not as bad as that. The weight, I think, is what he means. He then left them to make their calculations. Now, when I finish this, I'm going to ask if you can put this all together, darling. He was 15 minutes late at the pub, and his usual corner was occupied. He ate and drank quickly and calculated he'd made up 3 minutes. Then he bought the Yardleys at the chemist in St. John's Arcade, the Earl Grey at Jackson's, a double Gloucester there too to save time, although he usually went to the cheese shop in Jermyn Street. But the Maltesers, which he had intended to buy, had run out by the time he got there. The assistant told him there had been an unexpected demand, and he had to buy Kit Kats instead. He was only 3 minutes late when he rejoined Davis. You never told me they were having a check, he said. Well, I was sworn to secrecy. Did they catch you with anything? Not exactly. He did with me. Asked what I had in my Macintosh pocket. I'd got that report from 59800. I wanted to read it again over my lunch. What did he say? No, he let me go with a warning. He said rules were made to be kept. To think that fellow, Blake, what did he want to escape for? Got 40 years. Freedom from income tax, intellectual straits, and responsibility. And it was we who suffer for it now. Colonel Daintree wasn't very difficult, Castle said. He knew a cousin of mine at Corpus. That sort of thing makes a difference. What's going on?
To be continued.
Boom. In the criminal
I
justice
remember
system.
loving this book very,
It's
very
great.
much.
It's just absolutely wonderful.
And it's so beautifully written.
It is so beautifully written. It begins by quoting Conrad. I only know that he who forms a tie is lost. The germ of corruption has entered his soul. Do you hear all the laughter?
Yes.
It's a nice sound. So thanks very much for being with us tonight in our open book. Sorry about all the problems tomorrow night.
Blame
we'll have
you,
no problem.
Riverside. We've sent you a lot of emails and many messages on the X, the
Yeah,
Twitter.
yeah.
Please respond.
Please respond.
We pay you a lot of money.
We'll see you later. Take care. Bye-bye. Oh, I leave.